So welcome everyone to today's call. This started as an upward mobility focused event, but because the topic is so relevant to all of you, we've added some additional participants from the Elevate to Even Plus nonprofit internship program. So we've got a mixture of people here. And I'm really excited to bring the group together because, as I said, this information is so relevant. And we're very, very fortunate to have Ashley join us today to give us her perspective, really from a corporate employer's point of view about what they're looking for from applicants and what you can do when you apply for a job to really stand out. So Ashley, if you don't mind, if I could just hand it over to you and you can provide a little bit more of your background and then jump into the presentation, if that's okay.
Certainly. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm coming to you from Johnston, Rhode Island. I am in the office today. So and our offices have these beautiful sliding glass doors and glass walls. So if you see me distracted, it's because maybe my team is looking for me. So apologies in advance. But delighted to be here. So, just a little bit about myself before we get started. I have been working professionally now for 14 years, and all 14 years, except for a 6-month stint, was in the human resources function. Um, you know, University and early in career is a really exciting area for me. It's where I got my start in human resources. But I got pulled from a career fair. Like I got plucked out of a career fair by a campus recruiter to start my first professional role in a technical sales role, and then moved within that organization into HR and other functions. So, I think what we're talking about here today and forums like this are just really critical for your development success, and what an opportunity to get to ask questions. In my 14 years of working in HR, I supported the US, Canada, and Mexico in campus recruiting and early in career for about 3 years before I moved to an HR business partner role supporting manufacturing. I oversaw from an HR perspective 2 unionized manufacturing plants where we made circuit breaker boards. Very, very cool. If you don't know what one is, I can certainly educate you later on that. But a wonderful experience, really helped broaden my perspective. And then prior to FM, I worked in healthcare in a number of different HR leadership roles, supporting all of employee relations, chief safety officer, LOAs, Americans with Disabilities, of course, recruitment, but a lot of my time spent really working with business leaders and their strategy and supporting the workforce development plans. So that's a little bit about me. 2 more short pieces of information that, I'm not going to weave throughout the presentation, but I've moved all over the United States professionally, but also growing up. My parents and my family moved for my dad's career throughout the course of my life. So I think I went to 12 different schools before I started college. So a lot of moving around. But all US based, and had some great opportunities professionally to travel again throughout the US, North America, and some international travel as well. So today's focus for the next 50 or so minutes, I'd like you to feel enabled to interrupt and ask questions. Certainly we'll plan to pause for questions as we go through, but I don't want this to just be me talking. If you have questions, chances are somebody else does as well. I'm going to plan to talk about the recruitment process, a little bit, how you can prepare to do some pre-work as you hopefully go through the recruitment process. So resume writing, interviewing tips and tricks, both in person and digitally, and then some branding opportunities that you may have to just explore as you prepare to head back to campus. any questions or concerns with that overview?
Sounds good.
Okay. I am going to, let's see, I'm going to share this screen over here and bring up my presentation. So just let me know when you can see it. I'm just going to move something over as well. All right, I think you guys can see my screen. Is that correct?
Not yet, but let me see if there, now it's coming up. Yep, we've got it.
Okay. All right. So preparing can be the hardest part. I know not everybody has videos on. Feel free to use the chat if you have that enabled in this Zoom presentation. I am curious who all has written a resume before or who has a resume nearby that they can reference throughout the course of the call. Does anybody, just quick, you have written a resume before? Yes, you have it somewhat nearby. Take a peek at. Okay.
Yeah, I could do that.
All right. So feel free to toggle between screens, but I certainly do think preparing can be the hardest part. But there's some things that I have found are helpful over the course of the years to enable success. So the first thing is really understanding what a typical application to interview process looks like. I tried to create this to look like Candyland. Anybody remember that board game from like your childhood year? Okay. So I call this a Candyland map. We start from stage 1 to stage 6. Of course, there can be tweaks and changes depending on the organization that you're working with. But your resume is key at that start point. So the initial contact, we'll talk about that in a little bit. As you move through stage 2 and 3, those interviews are really, really critical. You may have assessments that you undergo as part of your recruitment process. Generally speaking, for most organizations, they may take place as you're in the midst of the interviews. It could take place afterward. I think a lot of different organizations choose different things. But I think some of the Gartner research that I've done for early in career, about 80% of employers are now completing some sort of assessment as part of the process. So just to be prepared for those requests and inquiries. Of course, stage 5, the offer stage, is the most exciting, not only for you as a seeker of opportunities, but also for us on the recruiting side. The days I get to extend the job offers are the best days for me. So, hopefully something exciting. And then as you go through the onboarding process as a new hire. So today we're really going to focus on stages 1, 2, and 3. But before I ever advocate for someone to start writing a resume, I think it's important for you to know your 4 W's. So what do you want to do? Where is it that you want to do it? Why are you excited? And what's the cost? For those of you who have had an internship or worked before, you may know some of these W's, but I would really encourage you as you endeavor to write or endeavor to rewrite your resume. If you know those 4 W's, that will act as a nice roadmap for you as you go through writing the different components of a resume. So let me just throw it out there. Do you feel like you know what it is you're seeking? What type of role? And has everyone had a chance to really consider where you want to do that, right? Like I talked a little bit about moving around the country. Are you open to relocation? Are you passionate about organizations that focus on employee well-being? Are you interested in not-for-profit, corporate, right? Really focusing on where it is you're going to tailor that search. Understanding why you're excited and motivated to apply, to interview, to network, that will be key for some of the things that I ask you to ensure you prepare for a little bit later. And what is your cost? I feel slightly envious of you all today compared to when I was going through looking for internships and co-ops. Some of the pay transparency laws that have come into effect in the United States help you really identify some of that was a huge question mark for some of the other generations, some people that have 5+ years of experience. So being able to take advantage of those posted salary ranges for specific roles or generally within organizations is going to help you be able to answer that really clearly and succinctly.
What is your cost? Is that like how much you want to get paid for the position?
Could be. Great question, Brandon. I think generally speaking, yes, you should know what you think your value is worth and align it to what that organization is posting publicly in terms of pay transparency. I think some other things to consider are what is it going to cost you to actually go there, and making sure everything aligns to what your need is. I never relocated for an internship, but that is becoming more and more common. At FM, we relocated like 1/3 of our interns and co-ops this past school year. So you have to kind of think about what you're applying to, where it is, and then what that cost is for each unique opportunity. I think having general answers to this for those local roles is okay, but just like a resume, these 4 W's, those answers can be slightly tweaked and changed based off of positions that you're actively pursuing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions about the 4 W's? Have you heard of the 4 W's before? No, write it down. I think it's really important. I'll pull this back in at a later slide. But just think about what do you want, where, why, and what is it going to cost? So writer's block, anyone? I tried to be a little clever in this. So just by a show of hands, I feel like I saw April, you say you had a resume. Brandon, I feel like I saw you acknowledge. Chantel, if I'm saying your name correct, do you have a resume? Okay. The rest, I can't see your faces, so can't look for verbal cues, but sometimes writing a resume is really hard. Sometimes it's simple. Other times you may be working from a resume that you wrote 2 years ago, and I think that there are some tendencies to try to take what you have and just edit and tweak over time. And sometimes you might be best suited to just totally start over. So what is a resume? What do you think a resume is? Simple question. What is a resume to you? Maybe Brandon or April.
I think it's a reflection of yourself and your past experiences and skills and what you can bring to the table or what you have to offer.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I frame a resume, in my mind, a resume is your advertisement. It's an advertisement all about you, where you're the subject matter expert. You're the SME of who you are. And really there's an opportunity for you to put just enough out there to interest and intrigue, and not too much to get lost in the sea of sameness. And so a resume really is a brief advertisement of who you are with a goal to be selected. And I share this because, I thought about putting what a resume is not and didn't want to include that. But one of the things that I've seen in 14 years of always reviewing resumes in some way, shape, or form, there are some tendencies for a resume to kind of become an autobiography. So as recruiters, we'll see people literally write their entire history from maybe high school to current date with every single activity and action in between. When we're working with early in career, recruiters generally do not want to see more than a 1-page document. Up until about 8 to 10 years, you should be able to parse down your skills and qualifications to a 1-page advertisement of you. Otherwise, you might get lost in that sea of sameness where individuals, recruiters, managers are not going to read every single line item. The other thing to consider, and I would ask and encourage each of you to boldly go and ask for feedback about your written documents, is it's not a list of tasks. It's not a list of what the job description says you're going to do. It's not a list of things that you attended, such as weekly meetings or cadence calls. It's a list of accomplishments and skills. So as you think about this presentation, maybe later today, this afternoon, or over the weekend, anytime in the near future, I would ask you to take a really keen eye to what you have written in every area of your resume to make sure it's not autobiographical, that it is not a list of tasks, but instead really a powerful document that describes skills that you're capable of completing and experiences that you have been a part of. So here I've just included a traditional resume format. I do have my contact info later in this presentation, and I'd be happy to chat one-on-one with you. This does not have to be written in stone, but generally speaking, this is the order that most recruiters and hiring managers are accustomed to. This is aligned with SHRM information, Society of Human Resources Management, Gartner, which is a huge repository of data and research. And you'll see name, of course, always at the top of your resume, a summary of who you are, some selected achievements, your professional experience, if you have it, and education or professional certifications. For those that are still pursuing your education, I always do recommend putting like in pursuit of your bachelor's degree in XYZ, right? It's helpful to have anticipated graduation dates because for some internships and co-op opportunities, only certain levels of students can be selected. And so any information you can put while pursuing that formal education that helps a sourcer or a recruiting specialist get you associated with the right position and in that interview loop is going to help you. The last thing that I put on this list is personal information with an abundance of question marks. So I'm curious from your perspectives what each of you thinks about that personal information that you may or may not have seen or been advised to put on. What do you guys think? When I say personal info, I mean everything from hometown, your residence location or address to hobbies. Do you think that has a place on your resume?
I would say no. Typically I do put my address on, but not like my hobbies unless they apply to the job that I am applying for. But usually I would keep, other than like my address, I would keep personal information off of my resume.
Okay. So about 60% of early in career resumes at this point in time have personal information loaded that I, as a recruiting professional, would advise against. I full disclosure, I went to Purdue University, but Purdue University has an online writing lab that is, recommended and pretty popular in terms of research that they push out. Purdue indicates that any personal information should not be included unless it's specific to a membership that you're a part of for civic clubs, professional experiences, especially for those that you had a leadership role. So I wouldn't advise to include that you were a member of Delta Zeta, a social sorority, for example, unless you had a leadership role toward an academic chairman position, for example, or if you were in a business management association and had a leadership role and a treasury role. You're going to school maybe for finance. Those are applicable. But your resume, your job advertisement, your advertisement of yourself, excuse me, really we would want to limit that information, especially in time. That resume, that one page is going to be very tight. And so you'll see that information. You really won't have room for that. Brandon, not to use you, but you, I can see you and you're participating. The address, it's an interesting point to bring up. You brought up, I do some resume critiquing on the side on my free time for friends and family who are seeking opportunities, especially post-pandemic. Putting your actual address on a resume has become not best in class, not recommended. There may be times where it would behoove you, however, where you can leave it off, you should. Your application is a more appropriate place for that actual physical address to be listed, and really not necessary on the resume at this day and time. That's a huge change for anybody that, you know, has been in the workforce for a number of years. Full addresses were absolutely 100% customary previously. But the new research that's coming out would indicate not necessary, and also enables will not necessarily enable you to get called for that interview. So, any questions?
I had a question about the summary part.
Yeah.
Should we be adjusting like the statement depending on which role we're applying to, or should it be more of a general description of ourselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you know, I think most recruiters, most hiring managers would prefer to see a summary aligned to the function that you're applying to. I don't think you need to have it adjusted to each and every employer. So if you were to apply to FM Global, where I work, for example, I don't think you would need to address FM Global in that statement. But if you're applying to a finance treasury role, you would want your summary to be oriented to the skills and qualifications that are identified in those postings. When I was doing some career searching a couple years ago, I've been at FM now for 2.5 years. I had a talent acquisition leadership oriented resume. I also had an employee relations manager oriented resume. Those are my two, you know, favorite areas of HR. So I made sure I had those two. Sometimes I would adjust and tweak that summary if a posting was very, very specific, but generally I found those were the two pockets I was looking for, and I could use one or the other really effectively. Great question.
I have a question too. For the address, should we be putting like anything about the address, like city or anything, or should it just be left off completely?
Yeah, different schools of thought on this, but really the most current research would indicate take it all off. Where you have your name and contact information, I would recommend your full legal name. And if you go by a nickname or an alias, identifying that in parentheses. My brother is a good example of him, that he has a double first name, no middle name. So his name is Michael Bryant, but he goes by MB. So he has Michael Bryant, parentheses, MB, and then his last name. And then you would want to put the contact information that you are likely to be the only one to answer. So cell phone, not home phones, and your personal email address. Address, city and state, again, advising to leave off at this point in time. You're going to have to put that in as part of your application process. Let me give you an example of why, right? Does somebody give me a town you live in, or like a large metro area close to your home?
Summit, New Jersey.
What did you say, April?
Summit.
What state is that in?
Oh, New Jersey.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All right. So, is Summit typically commutable to New York City?
Yeah.
but you say yes. Would every person in Summit agree?
Probably.
And that, well, there's a pause there, right? So not knowing Summit myself, if you even had to chance that question, you don't want a recruiter or hiring manager making that decision for you. Can April commute from Summit to New York City every day? If you put that on there, unfortunately, people will make assumptions on, can they get there? What happens if it snows? What happens if this happens? Are they going to be able to be an in-office employee, which is the requirement of, XYZ job? Eliminating that will allow you to have conversations about that if you get selected for your interview, if you have those conversations with the manager, but you don't want people making assumptions or decision making on your behalf that don't know information about you. Like I work in Johnston, Rhode Island. Boston is the biggest metro area that most people would know of. Again, do I want someone, if I were to apply to a job in Boston, assuming because my resume says Johnston that I can't get there, right? Like you don't necessarily want them decision making on your behalf, but you as the job seeker should be realistic in terms of, am I applying to a role I can get to or realistically would move to? Does that make sense? Especially, I think we're seeing a orientation to return to office in the market, generally speaking, not every industry, not every employer. 2 years ago where everything was remote, I think almost every single person seemed to strike that city and state. And so now that has continued to stay where we're trusting job seekers to really be thoughtful and conscientious about those locations and feasibility to come to work. Great question, great dialogue. Any other questions? I think under professional experience, one of the things that I do see pretty often, unfortunately, is the lack of using reverse chronological order. And so you do want the most recent experiences that you have to be at the top. Because that's where the eyes are going to go, right? Recruiter, hiring managers, eyes are going to go to the top. They're going to read that summary, learn a little bit about your achievements, and then that most recent employer typically is most relevant. But as you go further, you might have drop-offs in terms of somebody reading every single line of your resume. So again, most recent first. Okay. So I'm going to move into a little bit away from the format, but talking about how we write on our resumes. And I would ask you, this is one of those areas I'd ask you to just kind of jot down in your notebook or try to make a mental note of this for yourself. Power verbs are absolutely key and critical in not only professionally here at FM when I'm reviewing resumes as part of my work, but also this side gig I've alluded to where I look at, review, and help write resumes for others. I often find very passive verbs being used. I attended weekly meetings. That is one line of your very short, eligible advertisement of yourself. Do you want a hiring manager to know that you attended weekly meetings or that you publicized those and got the meetings up to 100% attendance, right? So the verbs that you're using, the way that you're writing about what you did is really, really important. And so I've included some power verbs. I assume I can send the slide deck after the fact in a PDF format, but I can send you all of these. And I would really advocate you take a look at those verbs that you're using, not only align them all to the same tense, except for your current employer if you're actively working, but making sure they're action oriented to what you did. That keen eye of really, is this helping me advertise who I am and how they want to see me? So I have a couple more examples of this. So, wrote and communicated something that you achieved, you attained. A lot of internships, co-ops, entry level, you have to do a lot of research. So, some other opportunities to change some of those verbs around to really try to attract, mix things up for those hiring managers and recruiters. I don't want to flip too fast, but again, I think you'll have an opportunity to look at this as well. But again, some other opportunities here. I will say, sometimes I do feel like I've had applicants and candidates who've like opened up a thesaurus and just tried to change and tweak things. I would advise, make sure it makes sense to what you're trying to communicate, but do not overestimate the power of really nice verbs that explain what you actually did. Have any of you that have an active resume looked at it in reverse order before your actual document? No. Okay. So one of the recommendations I would have each of you take is to read your resume in reverse order. As the person who wrote your resume, you're writing about yourself, right? So it's harder to critique yourself. But if you start reading it out of order, you will start thinking about it more subjectively and be able to make some tweaks and changes. That is often where most people really start to identify that they're using passive voice, past tense, future tense, active tenses, and you really want to make sure that's cleaned up and accurate before you start submitting those applications. And it is really hard to catch your own mistakes in your own writing. So finding a trusted professor, teaching assistant, roommate, friend, person in your class to take a look at it and give you some feedback is absolutely key before you actually go and hit those submit buttons on Indeed and job websites. Some other pitfalls that I do before we shift gears a little bit, some other pitfalls that I have seen in the past that I didn't want to write a slide about, but just for you to be thoughtful. I don't want to ask if anybody has a 2-page resume at this point in time, but I've been there, right? At a couple years of professional experience, I felt like my list of achievements and accomplishments was worthy of that 2nd page, but had that knowledge from, mentors and career services, got to get it down to 1. And so I myself was like, great, I'll just tweak the font and mess with the margins and get it down to 1 page, right? Please don't do that. Take it from me, someone who's looking at resumes in and out. There are days where we're sifting through 1,000 resume documents. If you drop your document down to 0.8 font and expand your margins out to, 0.4 inches on each side rather than the, customary 0.8 to 1 inch, you're going to have people drop off because you've created a document that's become too challenging to read. So you don't need to tell me if you've done it, but I can tell you, I watched all of my friends do it. I've watched my spouse do it. I've done it myself. Don't fall into that trap to follow that 1-page rule. I would advise you go back into this and really subjectively look at everything that you wrote about yourself and your achievements and make sure you're eliminating anything that isn't going to actually sell what you've done. Any questions, thoughts, commentary? Can you guys tell that I love this stuff? Maybe, yes. Okay. These are the things I enjoy at nighttime. So, all right. So I'm going to switch a little bit, how to stand out in a crowd. Before your interview. So we talked about a little bit about the interview process, that Candyland map, writing your resume. Before you actually sit down to an interview, and honestly, before you start applying, which may be too late and maybe not, but I would argue nothing is too late. I would really advise you to take some time to figure out if you're standing out in a crowd, and if you're standing out in the way that you want to. So what I mean by this, who has a social media account? All of us, right? Full disclosure, did anybody like Google me before today's session? No. Okay. I Google every person Like if I'm going to interview, I Google every interviewer before I sit down with them, right? Like you always get an invitation, you know who's gonna, I love to go onto LinkedIn. I love to type into Google, you know, my interview's name is Steve Russell, right? Who is Steve Russell? What's his job? Pull up his LinkedIn profile. I like looking at those profiles. I like to see, where did they go to school? Do we have the same alma mater by chance? Is there a way that in advance I can start practicing how I can build some rapport? What I would encourage each of you to do is Google yourself. You may be surprised at what you find. And while you can't totally control everything that pops up, you do have some control over some of it. I'll share, when I Googled myself, my home address popped up and I was like a little not pleased about that. But what didn't pop up were pictures of, you know, my kids. It was very professionally oriented. I have an active LinkedIn page. I have been tagged by the company on my LinkedIn page. So I would encourage all of you to do that before you go through the interview process of yourself to see what somebody else may be seeing of you. Additionally, update your LinkedIn. Do you guys all have LinkedIn? I assume so. Okay, assuming can be dangerous. But LinkedIn is a powerful tool. I will say LinkedIn is a little bit saturated, right? Like 10 years ago, LinkedIn really was a job seeking tool. Now I get a lot of advertisements and sales inquiries for me. However, it is still a great tool for you to list open to work around your profile, to have information about yourself, to upload your resume for those that have LinkedIn recruiter seats. So you want to make sure your LinkedIn is up to date. I would never advise, unless you are going to school for social media marketing and want to work for a boutique type firm, I would not link your other social media to your LinkedIn profile. That's a Ashley 10 cents preference. But I would also take a look on all those other social media channels that you may have. And I probably don't even have a fraction of them anymore, but Instagram, Twitter, Facebook or X, Snapchat, TikTok, I would take a peek and make sure what you're putting out into the world is going to help that advertisement that you're also putting out in the world. Some of this social media activity that we all, well, you don't want to say all, but most, 99% of us participate in, it does end up overlapping. So just being cognizant of the brand that you're pre-creating via this social aspect of your life and the brand that you're trying to create for future and prospective employers. Are any of you Googling yourself right now? Is anybody freaked out? Yeah. I have done a similar session one time in person, and I had a brave in-person audience member come up and Google themselves, which was such a great learning opportunity for everybody because it was a very evident lot of images of you know, probably a really fun day on a boat, but definitely not a fun day you want a prospective employer to see necessarily. So again, I mean this sincerely. Take a peek and edit those things that you don't necessarily want to see. Limit some of those profiles with some of the privacy settings. Just take a look and make sure what is out there about you actually want out there. Also, if you find your own address, just know like that is just part of the state of the state today. So in addition to social media, what else you can do to stand out in the crowd? I am a huge proponent of the 60-second sell. You might know it as a 30-second sell. You may not have ever heard of this before. I think everybody should have this at every point in their life, at every point in their career. You are the expert of yourself. You need to be able to talk about yourself clearly, succinctly, with passion. And you gotta get it down to 60 seconds or less. Elevator pitch, maybe you've heard that phrase before. This is theoretically the same idea, but a little bit longer. Has anybody created a 60-second sell or an elevator pitch in the past? Yes. Have you had the chance to use it?
I had to do one for an assignment, but I never used it like for a job.
Okay, but you've had the opportunity to think through what you would say, why you want to say it, and what you want to get out there. And so your next step is maybe try it on a random person when you're walking around, because practice certainly makes perfect. And happy to take any brave volunteers, but this is a very effective tool that can be used both in an interview setting, at a career fair, at networking events, and quite honestly, anywhere, because as a recruiter, we are always recruiting. If we find someone that out in public, at a restaurant, at the library, that we strike up a conversation with, contact information is exchanged so quickly. I mean, I've hired someone out of a Dunkin' Donuts window before that served me my coffee and my kids my donuts in the back seat. You know, that person stood out to me. I'm sure the owner of the Dunkin' Donuts building didn't really appreciate it, but that person had their own little sales pitch and presented themselves in a branded way that really stood out in my mind of, this is a high potential person that could transition to a different area very, very quickly. And so you just never know who you might meet. So, do I have any volunteers for me to pull out my stopwatch on my cell phone and see how you do on a 60-second cell? No one. I have like no swag to be able to offer, no gift cards because we're all far away from each other. Do you think you can do it? Maybe. I don't want to put anybody outside of their comfort zone. I would really encourage you, get in front of the mirror tonight, try to come up with this 60-second cell, practice it a couple times. I think you might find that you either come way under 60 seconds or go way over 60 seconds. Take some time to try to figure out where that sweet spot is, and then set your iPhone up on your dresser in front of your mirror, record yourself, see what you're doing when you're talking, and make sure you're presenting yourself in a way that you want to. Oftentimes, and I imagine each of you have had to publicly present in the past. I don't know if you've had the horrifying experience of being recorded and having to watch yourself. I did at Purdue. They made us, one of my communication 400 level classes, you had to do an activity and present for over 10 minutes. I decided to juggle while presenting. They were recorded. It was a painful thing to have to watch what happens as things go wrong, but sometimes we stumble over our words and then our faces really betray us. Sometimes we fidget so much that we're actually distracting to the person who's trying to listen to us. And so recording yourself and really trying to focus on how you're going to edit that behavior back or add some behavior or nonverbal cues will be really important for you to be successful. And again, coming up in the fall semester, this is heavy career season time, you know, up starting in the next, honestly, I think like 2 weeks, the first career fairs that we're going to starts. These 60-second cells are absolutely important for you to really try to make an impact. And again, get that advertisement to a recruiter or manager to get that interview.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I have tried practicing these before, and I always have a hard time with where to start with my background. What would you say is a good, because I know like if I'm doing an interview, most likely they don't want to hear about, you know, a lot of like my high school experience. It's more focused on recent experience. What would be like a good starting point to start talking about like myself in a more general like background?
Sure. I'm not going to give you the most clear answer, but I am going to answer you. I think it depends on who you're giving your 60-second cell to. So if you're at, so you're in New Jersey, where do you go to school?
Gettysburg.
Okay. All right. So if you're at a networking event that maybe your entire college or degree program or graduating class got invited to, your 60-second sell, I think I would use your current educational background as the first point. Like, my name is April Sanchez. I am a senior here. I'm studying this. If you have a great GPA, never hurts to throw it out. If you don't throw it out, everyone's going to assume it's below a 3.0. And then start talking about what you want to do. So your background really is your educational background at that point. If you're at a career fair and you're, let's say, at, I don't want to use FM as the booth because I work there, but let's say you're at like Google's booth, right? Your background, you might decide to change a little bit about your background to align to what that recruiter, that organization may be interested in. So in that case, I would still say your full name. I'm a student at Gettysburg. My graduation date is this. I'm really excited to be here today because I remember the first time I used Google was blah, 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 blah. I'm really interested in the positions that you advertised in the book because of this, this, and this. And I think it aligns really with my specialty in this area, right? Like, you can tie in some interesting little facts about why they're relevant to you, your experience with them, which would be a delighter for most organizations. If you have relevant like internship or co-op experience under your belt, that's also a great opportunity to put that in. But given you are currently pursuing your education at this point in time for your 60-second sell, I would always put that first with your anticipated graduation date. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
It's just like the resume, like you might need to have one or two of them prepared that you are able to switch and swivel to and from, just depending on your audience. Okay. We are like 11 minutes away from our deadline. I have a couple more slides. I don't want to miss the interview portion. So you got picked. Now what, right? You got selected to interview. Your resume worked. Your 60-second sell at the career fair worked. However, you got picked. Now, what do you need to do? Past behavior is the best predictor of future performance. I don't have a specific statistic on this, but every organization I've ever worked at interviews with behavioral based interview styles. I have also never personally gone through an interview that didn't have a behavioral based interview style. So when I say behavioral based interviews, does everybody know what that means? It's the questions that sound like, tell me about a time when you were able to satisfy a difficult client. Describe a time when you had to make a decision, your manager, blah, blah, blah. Tell me a little bit about this, right? Describe a time. So we're asking very specifically what you have done in a situation. Now, having conducted so many interviews in the past, I have a couple of thoughts on this for everybody. Don't be afraid of jotting a note down, right? You could be so busy trying to listen and absorb that question that you start solutioning toward what your answer is, that you kind of forget the second half of their question. Feel free to take notes. The best way to try to answer them, you might have heard of the SHARE model, you might have heard of the STAR model. Theoretically, they're going to all get you to the same place. It's telling your story in an organized methodology. I actually use something called an SBAR in my professional work, which is based off of the SHARE and STAR model. So you're telling someone what the situation was, if there were hindrances or barriers, challenges, what action you took, and we're going to double back on action in a second, what the results were and how you evaluated the process. It's easy to use the SHARE model in a way that says that everything worked out perfectly, right? Or you give a part of the story that indicates those hindrances weren't there. You want to make sure you create a balanced answer that you know, your evaluation is fair, right? If you had opportunities to improve, if you had wished you'd seen something that you did in hindsight, being 2020 as it is, you know, bring that up. And I think a lot of interviewers, managers alike, like to see when applicants and candidates have thought through, okay, I did it this way, and what could have been better, right? To go back to action, in your coursework, you know, if you take labs, group projects, even professionally, we've moved a lot from individual centric work to team oriented work. One of the things I hear both early in career and professional, it's the inappropriate constant use of we did this, we did that, we did this, we did that. A good interviewer is going to stop you and say, let me know who's the we and what did you actually do. But you want to beat the interviewer to that inquiry by making sure the action portion of your answer is very clear on, I worked on a project team with 3 people. I was not the lead, but the natural leader of the group. And here's what I did to try to move things along, right? It's great to explain the shared we in terms of what the result was, but I would encourage you as you practice and prepare to ensure that you are very deliberate in explaining what you did. What's the I in the story versus the group we? Yes.
I have a question, sorry. Would it be appropriate to use like specific numbers and specific, like, let's say you're working with a platform, like maybe if you're in an accounting position, like financial edge, would that be appropriate? And
Absolutely.
would the same work for a resume as well?
Yes. Specifics in resumes as well as answers generally are going to lead people to trust you know your data inside and out and that you didn't over engineer your answers. So yes, if you have access to that, if you're able to recount quickly in a live one-on-one session, certainly do so. In my resume, which, you know, I thought about actually putting here on one of these slides just as, you know, a guide, and I didn't do that because I didn't want to lead you to answers, so to speak, lead the witness. I put a lot of data-driven numbers and outcomes on my resume to prove a point, right? Talent acquisition, it's not guesswork. There is an actual science behind it. There are measurable outcomes. There are goals and deliverables. So, you know, while I'm not a finance major by any means, nor have I pursued a career in finance, you would see a lot of numbers on my resume because they lead to what I've actually delivered and accomplished throughout the course of my years. Excuse me. Okay. So before the interview, I imagine you know this, review the job description fully beforehand and really take some time to identify the skills that are listed compared to yours. Skills isn't totally a broken out section in every job posting, but qualifications are moving towards skills for a lot of organizations. So looking at those qualifications and or skills and just documenting the relevancy to yours will be an important step in that preparation, and have that list. Like it's okay to have, you know, a legal pad next to you during the interview if it's in person. It's okay to even have digital notes prepared, but we want to make sure that you tell that person why you're maybe looking off screen or why you might be typing. Prepare examples, prepare behavioral based responses, try to anticipate what types of questions that they will have for you based off of how they wrote the job description. So if a job description says, you know, liaise with C-suite executives to deliver on time, blah, 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 right? You might want to think about a time, well, I haven't ever worked with the C-suite before, but I have worked with directors, and how did I approach that work, right? Anticipate those questions and try to practice. And practice makes perfect, right? Practice on camera, practice with friends, practice your technology if it's a digital interview to make sure you're able in different settings to perform and explain all of your great skills and qualifications in real time. Some interview do's and don'ts. This is kind of a little bit of an eyesore in terms of a slide, but I have some interesting facts that were published at the end of 2023, so only 8 months outdated. Interviewing post-pandemic has become a little bit different than pre-pandemic. Gartner has produced in their sample size that about 1 in 5, so 20%, a little bit above, of digital interviewers, like the candidates, will not turn on their camera during an interview that is described to them in writing or otherwise as a digital interview. So, there could be a million reasons why that happens, but always be prepared to dress professionally, even if you think it's going to be a Zoom or a Teams or a Skype where the cameras are off. When in doubt, dress like you're going to be on camera, because if that recruiter or that manager turns it on, you're going to want yours on as well. And you're going to want to make sure you're in a place dressed, poised, ready to go. Act professional and friendly. Sometimes that friendly piece goes a little bit too far. And I think some applicants let their guard down and let some, profanity slip out of their mouths. I was describing some examples. So professional and friendly. Don't cross that line to too friendly. Smile, try to make eye contact, especially for digital interviews. I'm not sure how much time you guys have been spending recently on Zoom, Skype, Teams, but there's always that opportunity to have your face over here on the bottom of your screen. People watch themselves. So before that interview, if you can minimize your own face, it's a natural instinct. That's one of the reasons why so many people had Zoom fatigue during the pandemic. Get rid of your face. In a normal boardroom setting, you would never be able to see yourself. So you don't want that distraction when you're actually interviewing with other people. Feel free to ask clarifying questions and take notes. It's okay to not understand a question somebody is asking. Make sure you clarify it before you try to formulate a response and spend 60, 90 seconds answering something that isn't even what they asked. And of course, have questions prepared in advance. Usually one of the leading signs of a candidate's disinterest in the role is having absolutely no questions about the organization, the role, the team. And some of the don'ts: don't be late, right? I think it's totally okay to have challenges and to be open and honest about why you might have been late, but wherever possible, plan for early arrivals. Distractions in person, distractions digitally, they happen, right? But wherever possible, minimize everything that isn't on screen with you, or move yourself to a private corner of your home, of your dorm, of your apartment, so that you are able to be focused. Don't bluff answers. I feel like that's, very clear. I don't think people would, but sometimes we get to the point where we onboard individuals and it turns out that their skills absolutely do not match in reality what they shared. And then don't criticize yourself. Don't be negative. Don't be negative about yourself, negative about former employers. Find a way to be open and honest while with a positive overall reflection. And I know we're at time. I did prepare something about virtual interviews. I do think we kind of covered everything on that just verbally. And then I just wanted to throw up my contact information for any of you that maybe have questions after the fact. I'm happy to partner or answer things or be a resource. This is certainly something I absolutely love and am passionate about, and I do hope today was helpful for you.
Ashley, I will just jump in and say that was amazing. Really, really. And I wish I had this conversation when I was entering the workforce a million years ago. But even then, I got so much out of it for my own use. And some of your advice, I am going to now go back and look at how I'm presenting myself on LinkedIn and on my resume. So thank you so much. I don't know if anybody else has any last questions or comments before we say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Ashley. This was really helpful.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yes,
I love
thank
the
you.
Zoom tip too that you gave, because I think just being prepared, right, helps students realize the importance of turning the camera on. And one of the tips that I always share is up by the camera button, I have a smiley face sticker that then I look
Oh,
at the sticker
oh,
versus looking at myself on the if you can't, so create a distraction for yourself so that you're not looking at the sidebar with all the images on. And that was a result of Zoom fatigue, right? And coming out of the pandemic and working so much from the computer. So great tips. Thank you for sharing them.
of course. Well, and I assumed you meant it was a reminder to actually smile, which can be a huge stress relief in the interview process in and of itself. But yes, certainly to look at the camera and try to make that, eye contact digitally or in person for sure.
Well, I must say I was one of those people with the 2-page resumes,
Oh,
but now I'm going to be working on reducing that to 1 page. So it's just, choosing what to leave in and what to leave out, I guess, is on a base by base kind of situation, depending on what job you're applying to.
job you're applying to, where you are in your career, so I share the one piece, not knowing everyone, not everyone takes I went to junior high school direct to some research scientists that we hire have multiple PhDs. They're going to have 4-page resumes because they've been published 50 times, right? So there's always an exception to the rule, but generally, if you haven't been working professionally for 8 to 10 years, you should be able to pare it down to really action-oriented accomplishments on 1 page. But don't do like me. Don't bring it down to 8-point font because no one's going to read it.
Great advice.
Last
Thank you so much.
question for me.
Oh, Brandon, go ahead. Sorry.
So I'm currently in the process of applying to jobs, and I find that I'm hitting a wall with experience. Like I lack experience. A lot of the jobs are looking for 5+ years of experience. Or is there any information or recommendations you would have to like get around that?
It is so hard. So first off, I'm sorry because I went through that at one point in my career where, I might have had 3 or 4 years and everything I wanted was at 5 years. Sometimes a really thoughtful cover letter that explains how your skills or experiences are really beyond the years that you have can help you get that one, that shot, that interview to really explain how professionally mature you are beyond your worked years, right? I'm so happy where we are today. I think organizations generally are trying to, and it just takes a longer time to move away from X years of experience to instead, you need to have these skills and you need to have a mastery of this and intermediate skills in that. And that's going to help us in the future, but to solve for your problem today, a cover letter or maybe a summary that talks about how you have, more extensive skills in a certain area because of lived experiences, your education, some sort of professional group that you've been a part of will be helpful.
Thank you.
Here, working in healthcare, some organizations, it's a hard no. Like there are governing bodies that say if the resume can't demonstrate 5 years, you're out of compliance and then the organization is in jeopardy. So don't lose that passion to keep applying because that's not every industry.
So I should apply anyway if it's like.
You never know, right?
Yeah.
And also, right, like it's your advertisement of yourself. So what if you have this great resume, you have this really nice cover letter, maybe you don't meet the job that's posted today, but that recruiter hopefully is a trusted advisor to the businesses that they're supporting within their organization. They might know a more junior role is coming in the next 2 months. So it wouldn't be a waste of anybody's time to go ahead and start the conversation. And we do that a lot at FM, right? Like we'll know a little bit about what the organization is doing and their workforce plan. So you may not meet the qualifications that we have today, but we know someone internal is going to get that promo and it's going to open up something, one grade lower for which you would qualify, for which you would be a viable candidate. So we're going to go ahead and talk.
Thanks again.
Just don't get
I
disheartened.
just had, I have a question. I think you mentioned earlier how I think you have when you were looking for a job, you had 2 separate resumes. Like, do you think that having it 2 separate resumes or like a certain number is okay, or should we just be tweaking it as we're applying to jobs? Like, should I be like changing every single thing to tailor one specific job?
I would go back to your 4 W's and figure out what it is that you actually want. Like, is it an industry that you're looking to work for? And if that's the case, can you write a line to that industry? Can you write a line to a not-for-profit's vision, right? And then can that get used for a grouping of applications that you're going to submit? If you're super passionate about eco-friendly employers, in nonprofit or for it, like, is there a way you can write your summary that aligns with your what, right? And your why? So I know I didn't give you a direct answer,
No, that helps though.
but
I
I
understand
think
what you
having
mean.
a couple, if you have various areas of interest
Mhm.
or want to explore opportunities in various areas, you should have maybe 1, 2, or 3. I didn't say this and I should have. The way you save your resume in a PDF does matter. Like, don't, because we see the name that you saved your resume as. So if it's Chantel junior year FM Global and you're submitting it to Google, they're going to see that. And while that probably wouldn't be prohibitive for you get it, that's part of the package, right, that you're putting out there. And everything about your brand and who you are should be intentional in the interview process. So I would encourage, like, as you're PDFing things, to really be thoughtful of how can Chantel, am I saying your first name right? I keep
Yeah, you're saying
assuming
it
I am.
perfectly. No, you are. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Thank you. Like, name it in a way that makes sense to you, that you're going to know this is my not-for-profit oriented summary. This is my HR oriented summary. This is my sales oriented one, right? Like, figure out a methodology that will keep that clearly identifiable to you and not to anybody else.
Thank you.
Last quick question. Should you put your address in your cover letter?
No,
No?
get rid of it. You don't want people decision making on your behalf, right?
Oh yeah,
You
true.
want to be in that driver's seat, and assuming, I don't know, that you live in the same area as April Summit, never heard of it, but now I know. Like, you don't want someone assuming Brandon can't get to from Summit to, the Upper East Side, right? You need to assess, can I do that? Can I afford it? Is it possible? Is there a way for me to do it with public transportation, my car, whatever? Maybe you have a helicopter and you're like, I can go anywhere, right? You're deciding, leave it off. They're going to get it in your application, right? But hopefully at the time of that application, you've already had the chance to wow them with who you are and your skills, and have a conversation of, yeah, I can get there, right? 30 minutes, no big deal for me. 45 minutes, no problem. Whatever it is.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you again, Ashley. Really amazing. And thanks for going in stoppage time with us here for our last questions. So if you haven't already planned to send or have already sent a LinkedIn request to Ashley, a reminder to do so. And I will say, because she said it, she's available to answer your questions later if you want to reach out. But just truly an amazing session, so powerful and impactful and actionable. So thank you, Ashley.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to meet everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Very humbling to be invited. So I've really appreciated it myself.
Awesome. Well, thanks and have a good day, everyone.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Thanks for
Thank you.
Nice to meet everyone.